What's the worst secret you found out about a company? Story 1. Intuit lobbied to keep taxes complex. Screw TurboTax. So do you folks over there all have to do your own taxes regardless of what you earn? That seems rife for both fraud and accidental misreporting of tax. The vast majority of people here in the UK have their income tax deducted from their pay automatically through a process called PAYE, or pay as you earn. And if they have no other income source, that's it. The system does our tax for us at the end of the tax year in April, and we get a form called a P60 telling us what we've earned, what we've paid, and what we owed, and how our balance is zero. But ultimately, the whole income tax process is designed to be very simple. There's very few ways you can get rebates or offsets, so the vast majority of people who only have job-related income don't have to do anything. It means revenue from income tax is very accurate and much higher than it would be if self-reported. Almost every other country has a system like yours, but ours is so full of loopholes, deductions, penalties, and the like that it is impossible to know exactly what you will owe. So our employers take a best guess based on a table of values and a form we give them to say if we are married and how many dependents, usually kids, we have. The problem is this guess is almost never right, and if you tell them the truth, they usually take too little out and you owe at the end of the year. So many people, myself included, fill out the form saying we will have fewer dependents than we do, so at the end of the year we get a refund. This is just our own money, held in escrow, returned to us. It sucks to give the government an interest-free loan, but better than owing them money. It has kept this confusing because if you are very rich and can afford an army of tax accountants and lawyers, you can greatly reduce your tax burden. A certain former president who claims to be one of the wealthiest people in the world has paid $0 in federal income tax in recent years. For comparison, my middle-class family pays about $13,000 in federal income tax per year. You need a PhD in taxes to truly understand this stuff. Story 2. Super petty, I know, but Crumble Cookies. Their VP of HR did an AMA on LinkedIn that I happened to see because they are fairly local and have a few mutual connections. Anyway, she went off on why they were always understaffed in an area because everyone else is paying above market value for employees, and we only want to pay market value and hire people passionate about their or our brand and making cookies. It really rubbed me the wrong way because if everyone else is paying more than you, it doesn't mean they are paying above market value. It means you are paying below market value. I haven't been back since. Besides, they also sued another company for also selling cookies in square boxes, and honestly, the other companies taste better. As a survivor of the Logan, Utah cookie wars of 2018 and 2019, I hate Crumble Cookies. Underbaked, uber manipulative ownership, and beat the superior cookie chain baked. Now they think they can cudgel other cookie companies since they came up with the idea. Except they didn't. They just opened a week earlier, then they immediately went off to Provo headquarters cause that's where everybody goes. I can't wait until they implode. The owner of Crumble is such a tool. He went on a Twitter rampage while still in the middle of that copyright lawsuit. Can't believe it didn't get his case tossed out. Their branding was a little similar. Completely different colors and logo. Similar packaging aesthetic. I think it was a really bad faith effort to get rid of a competitor. Plus the cookies are consistently underbaked, probably because he skirts child labor laws by hiring 14-year-olds so he can pay lower wages, and making them pinky promise they won't touch any machinery in a bakery. Dude gives me the ick. They have also gotten in trouble for child labor. Story 3. Companies like BetterHelp, mental health platform, exploit clients' data and info and breach privacy, yet they still advertise everywhere somewhere in total about 3 lawsuits about it. I'm still curious about why so many YouTubers, even those who at least project the image of accountability being important to them, still take their business. The YouTube community is capable of dropping problematic businesses, as they do with established titles, but they've mostly just decided to collectively let these guys slide. I am a licensed therapist and have been practicing for 10+ years. BetterHelp is the absolute worst. They have been found to be non-compliant with privacy laws by Congress. They have knowingly and purposefully sold personal information about the therapy clients that should be protected under HIPAA. Let me rant about BetterHelp for a second. My partner was beginning their process of transitioning and was really worried about our relationship. We had been married for a year, together over 10. We were confused and unsure how to proceed, but they had a therapist from BetterHelp who mostly just shoved guidance documents down their throat and suggested a couples therapy session. I will never forget that phone call. This therapist immediately started antagonizing my partner, making them second-guess themselves and their choices, and said virtually nothing to me. I eventually interrupted and told them, actually, I am pretty sure they are doing the right thing, but we're trying to figure out what to do next. Can you give us suggestions to that end? Ultimately, the whole thing was pointless. No help was provided that I or we didn't already know. Screw BetterHelp and its subsidiaries. It's always one of the first things that shows up when you search for a therapist, too. Story 4. I used to work for Goodwill, and in the back I saw one of the coworkers, who has a physical and mental handicap, come out of the office of our store manager crying. I really liked this coworker. I remember her as one of the nicest people I've ever known. I asked her what was wrong, and she said that her wages were going to be cut substantially. She stated that the store manager was told by corporate that since she was not able to work as fast as others in the back doing pricing. I asked if she would mind if I asked what they had to cut it to, and she said $3.30 an hour. WTF. It turns out that Goodwill has a policy that they can pay workers a sub-minimum wage. This was pulled from a charity site on Google showing the policy. Section 14C allows corporations to pay people with disabilities a sub-minimum wage, according to Labor Department records. Goodwill pays some of its disabled workers as low as 22, 38, and 41 cents per hour. I stood there and hugged her while she cried. Goodwill does not show such goodwill towards their workers. Not only this, but the president of Goodwill is one of the highest paid nonprofit officials out there. Donate to other nonprofits, please, because Goodwill doesn't give a damn about their employees and their business model is almost solely dependent on your donations. My understanding is that this is a pretty complicated issue. On the one hand, there are people like your old coworkers who are absolutely being exploited for the sake of corporate greed. Your old coworker may not have been doing the job as fast as everyone else, but she was doing the job. On the other, what these laws are supposed to be for, at least in theory, is to create opportunities for people who are not capable of doing a job. It's for make-work positions that wouldn't otherwise exist, so that the disabled person can socialize, work on skills, and improve their self-esteem, things they wouldn't otherwise have access to. Story 5. Angie's List. Did work for a person and they left a good review on Angie's List. Next thing I know, I've got a guy from their call center blowing up my phone. He wanted me to pay them to put more good reviews under my company's name and to steer potential customers towards my business for an additional fee. Basically everything they say they don't do in their ads. I'm sure it was a trustworthy company when Angie still owned it, but it's scammy as hell now. I hate Angie's List for a completely weird and personal reason. When my grandpa was succumbing to dementia and we were working to move him into a home, he kept showing us ads for Angie's List and Visiting Angels that he ripped out of a magazine. He kept telling us to call these people because they will do everything you need to keep old people in their homes. No, that's not what they do. Having to have this same convo over and over and having him to get frustrated with us for not doing what he was asking. Ugh. Not necessarily Angie or Visiting Angel's fault, but I get sick to my stomach whenever I see or hear them mentioned. Nah, they were doing that stuff out of the gate. Was helping a relative open a small business 10 years ago when Angie's List was fresh and had the exact same experience. Except when they did their pitch, I said something like, "Isn't this all exactly what you guys promised not to do in your commercials?" He flipped out and tried to hit me with the mob protection racket BS. "You have a nice business there, it'd be a shame if something bad happened to it," kinda deal. I told him quite clearly where he could stick his offer and his company. The Better Business Bureau is the same. Every branch is independently owned. Story 6. Frontier Airlines likes to post fake flights at good times and charge a premium for them. Then they cancel the good flight that never really existed and stick you on a red-eye they sell for much cheaper and don't refund any of the difference in price. Yeah, you can refuse and get your money back and book with another airline, but you have to wait on hold for an hour to do it, and now all of your options with other airlines have gone up hundreds of dollars since when you booked. That happened to my mom. I had to call the airline and arrange for them to get her money returned so I could book her on a proper airline that doesn't try to compete with Spirit. Frontier didn't used to be like this. I used to use them to fly to the Midwest. Just in the last few years, they decided to compete with Spirit to see who could be the worst airline. I had some really really good experiences flying Frontier in 2018 to 2019. No frills, obviously, but it felt like good value for the money. Then I took a couple of years off from traveling because, 2020 happened, and I flew them again for the first time a few months ago. It was by far the worst experience I've ever had on a plane, nearly making me swear off flying altogether, and it made my return flight on goddamn Spirit seem like first class. I'm not sure what exactly, but something has changed in the last few years that took Frontier on a sharp downward spiral, and now they're the only airline that I won't ever touch no matter the price. We are literally on our vacation right now after flying in on Frontier, and we will never use them again. We naively thought this would be similar to Southwest, which is our standard choice. They bumped us from an 8:30 a.m. flight to an 11:45 p.m. flight, and then didn't take off until 12:30 a.m. Their airline staff was coming from another plane that was running late, so we had to wait for them to exit their plane and then board ours before we could board. We naively thought this would be like other airlines where first bags are free and carry-on are free. No, for our 3-person family, it cost us $470 in baggage, including return flight, and the weight limit is 40 pounds per checked bag, 10 pounds less than standard airline limits. No souvenirs for us. When we were trying to check in online, it kept trying to add additional fees. My husband and daughter's seats were already assigned, so we figured we would just try checking in at the airport since they have zero customer support. We went to the counter to ask for help, and they told us if we wanted help, they would have to charge us $25 and to just do it on our phones. So then we were told to go to the terminal to get our seat assignment, and my seat wasn't even by my daughter and husband. I'm 15 rows ahead of them. Cue my overtired 5-year-old sobbing. So I sat with her, and my husband sat alone. The third guy on our aisle, some solo flyer. Why they couldn't keep 3 tickets purchased together, I have no idea. Lots of seat drama at the front of the plane about someone who paid for a window not getting a window, etc., etc. In the end, they have entirely lost our business. We were not fans at all. Are there any airlines left that are actually good? Story 7. Hobby Lobby was fined $3 million for trying to smuggle looted ancient artifacts into the US. It's actually worse than just that. You left out the worst part. They were knowingly a major financial supporter of ISIS for years. That's why they were fined, because those artifacts were coming from terrorist groups and they knew about it. The CEO is a big buff for religious artifacts. Most of them are from the Middle East. They got sold because ISIS was looting the areas they took over. This is actually one of the major ways organizations like ISIS and the Taliban make money. There was an expert who was contacted by Hobby Lobby asking for advice on this before they were caught. According to them, Hobby Lobby had no interest in trying to avoid funding terrorism. They were just trying to see how they could evade detection. The person told them it is nearly impossible to guarantee that you aren't funding terrorism if you buy this on the black market. They did it anyway, so we know for a fact they knew about it before they did it. And they hate women having rights or bodily autonomy. Just because a company diverts part of an employee's compensation towards health insurance shouldn't mean that they have a say in what that covers. The money that paid for the insurance was earned by the employee. Just one more reason health insurance should be separated from employment. Didn't really expect a company named Hobby Lobby to have so much baggage. Story 8. DoorDash keeping drivers' tips for themselves. Also, they charge horrendous fees and keep most of it for themselves. They pay Dashers $2 to $2.50 per order. If it's 1 mile or 10, they expect customers to tip to make the difference. They charge a priority fee that's optional but does nothing. They overinflate their estimated times to make people pay that priority fee. They stop sending drivers orders if they decline too many that aren't profitable. In some markets, they hide the tip amounts, so drivers have to gamble if it'll be worth it or not. There is way more. They are crap, screwing drivers and customers every chance they get. Not saying the drivers don't deserve tips, they definitely do. No one seems to mention the restaurant employees though. They get 0 tips for these orders. There's rarely customer service involved for these, sure, but they also come during rushes, and all at once, and a lot of the employees don't have the power to just turn them off. It can be stressful as hell. Your customer service to tipping people will suffer a lot, and so will your tips, and drivers can sometimes get super impatient. I always liked delivery orders for giving us something to do, but it can be crap for a lot of reasons. They don't anymore and haven't for a few years now, but still, screw DoorDash for ever doing that to begin with. Their excuse excuse was that it helped subsidize orders from low tippers or people who don't tip and incentivize dashers to accept those orders, but it was wild. An example of the difference. Without the tip stealing BS. Order 1, $2 plus $0 tip. Order 2, $6 plus a $20 tip. Total, $28 for the dasher. With the tip stealing BS, order 1, $4, DoorDash adds $2 to incentivize you to take it. The person still didn't tip. Order 2, $8. DoorDash adds that same $2, but you don't get the rest of that $20 tip. Total, $12 for the same 2 orders. Then the customer is pissed because they spent extra money to get their order fast or show appreciation or whatever. People would be more likely to tip if there weren't so many fees. Story 9. There's a super expensive artisanal ice cream shop in my city. They pride themselves on their fresh, genuine ingredients. My mom has celiac and I wanted to take her there, so I asked for a full ingredient list on their ice cream. They really didn't want to give it to me, but it's the law, and it's gluten-friendly wasn't good enough. There is 0 real cream. It's all modified milk ingredients and artificial stabilizers and flavorings. Please don't trust any place that lists themselves as gluten-friendly. I have celiac disease too, and yes, while everybody's diagnosis is different, me and my friends' experiences led to bad glutening episodes. They aren't great with cross-contamination. Also, why call it gluten-friendly when gluten isn't kind to our intestines? It was really nice of you to think of your mom, and I'm so sorry for everything that occurred at the ice cream shop. Do they use some other phrase to weasel out of calling their product ice cream? Because ice cream has to be at least 10% milk fat by federal law. At least in the US. I suppose you could be somewhere else, but this is Reddit where people make that assumption no matter how likely they are to be wrong, so I'm doing it. Story 10. I will never buy anything from LG. Sometime around 2008-ish, they, like many other hardware or software companies, were messing around with what was essentially adware, seeing how far they could push things to get borderline malicious advertising onto your home computer. Stuff like the pile of CDs that came with your new gateway, the "Do you also want to install XYZ?" We're going to imply it's necessary when installing messaging apps, or the huge unnecessary printer software suite when all you needed was the driver. LG went a step further. They embedded adware in the firmware of their CD and DVD drives. Every X times you opened or closed the drive, you'd get a little pop-up from your system tray that served you an ad, pretty much indistinguishable from the legions of adware and spyware your aunt would get from clicking yes to all of her pop-up ads. Except nobody clicked yes on anything and it couldn't be removed. It was embedded in the drive itself, essentially performing an autoplay exploit on a virtual drive to show you the ads, then disappear again. They eventually were threatened with legal action and had to post a firmware update/removal tool on their website. The ad software was called Bluebirds, and LG scrubs all mention of it from their Wikipedia article every now and then. Something similar, Sony started putting a rootkit, essentially malware, on their CDs, which would stop copies being ripped on PCs. Ultra scummy behavior, and one which could be defeated by the black hacker magic of holding down the shift key when you insert the CD, old Windows shortcut for disabling autoplay on optical drives, so it wasn't even that effective. I wonder if Bluebirds was the inspiration for HP's decision to require people who buy its inkjet printers to sign up for an ink subscription, and program the printers to stop working if the users went longer than a set amount of time without buying new ink cartridges, even if the ink cartridges in the printer were still full. Nothing good ever comes out of a printer company. Story 11. Went to a small diner a few blocks away from me. I used to go there all the time. They were decent and the staff was great. Not the best ever, but it hit the spot. One day I went in and the owner started going around berating the staff and yelling at them in front of everybody. He saw me staring at him, so he came up to me and said, "I'm sorry about that." So I said to him, "If I worked for you and you talked to me like that, I'd smack the crap out of you." Immediately got up and left and never went there again. I was wondering when a local restaurant would come into play, and I just wanted to say that my friend serviced most of the oil tanks in the city, and he gave me a laundry list of places not to eat. A hotel that staged food on the floor because of a lack of counter space. A Chinese restaurant that would reuse oil for an unhealthy amount of time. Just nasty. There's a management adage that goes praise in public, criticize in private. I worked contract for a large nonprofit once, and I got to witness the VP of IT just lay into one of her employees in a meeting that I attended over something really minor. It immediately changed my opinion of the whole company, considering a corporate officer thought that was professional behavior. I got out as soon as I could. Yeah, there was a burger place near my office that I wanted to try out. I went and was the only customer. The two owners, who I assume were a couple, were cussing at each other in English. This place was in Panama. The poor cook, host, or waiter just gave me an "I'm sorry" look when he brought my food. After my meal, I tried giving the poor guy a tip for the great food and service amidst the BS-ery going on between the two owners, and he told me that all tips had to go in the jar at the register. I left my tip, and as I was leaving, stopped and told the bickering couple, "You know, your restaurant is in an area where there are several expats, an American embassy, and several international organizations. About 80% of your customers are fluent in English, so keep your bitching and moaning somewhere else while people are eating." The place lasted maybe another month after that, but I never went back. Shame too, the burger was really good. The restaurant industry has a lot of dirty secrets. Story 12. Stopped going to a nail salon after one of the employees shared that they have to sit in the back room in the dark when they aren't with a customer. ETA, to everyone making this into something it's not, I am just sharing what this person shared with me. I didn't think their employees were treated well from that info. Maybe some would find those conditions okay, but she did not. She got another job working somewhere else. I was just a customer. Their culture has nothing to do with it. I'm not flexing. Please stop trolling. I worked at a nail salon, maybe a little higher end than some that I typically see around. If a nail tech didn't have a client, they would usually sit in the back and watch TV on their phones, eat, and if they had time, help with laundry and general housekeeping. If it was their actual lunch break, they could go out and about until it was over. That would be awful, to be just forced to sit in the dark. I was in Vietnam in 2003 and met a Vietnamese American who was recruiting young women to work in America in the hair and nail salons. They have to work off the money that is invested in their arrangements and are basically slaves. This is common against lots of immigrant populations in the US. A bakery in my city got busted for smuggling immigrants in from Mexico. They would send them out with ice cream bikes and pay them below minimum wage, give them essentially a closet to live in, and then threaten them with deportation if they complain. It's really common, and the perpetrators are usually from the same country too. Story 13. There is a small vintage toy store chain near me called The Toy Vault. The owner, Dan, has been ripping people off for years, offering them very little money for their toy collections. He treats his employees terribly. Many toy collectors in the area have their own Dan story. One time, a couple of years ago, I was setting up a pop-up shop to sell a massive collection of toys that my friend's parents had hoarded. We had been advertising for a couple of weeks and were excited to make some people happy by offering great deals on a lot of cool toys. The Thursday before opening, Dan messaged me asking if there was a price we'd sell the whole collection for, saying that he could bring a truck that night and rid us of the burden. I said no because neither of us had the time and told him he could come on Saturday with the rest of the buyers. He replied angrily, calling me an amateur, and said that if we were serious about selling, we would make the time and that he knows we shop at his stores. Well, I don't anymore, Dan. Screw Dan, mayor of Toy Vault. There used to be a comics and collectibles store near me that was run by the same type of people. They would take the current month's comics and bag them and mark them up by at least 50%, so you would have to pay a premium even for the most recent issues. If they thought the comics were going to be hot, they marked them up even more. They were pretty much the only comic store in the area, and they were one of the few that sold a lot of independent comics, so it sucked that I had to boycott them. What's worse is their policy towards collectibles and action figures. The owner would buy case upon case of whatever the latest fad toy was and pull out the rarest figures and charge $100+ for them. Then he would drive his preteen son to the local Toys R Us with the rest of the figures and have the kid walk in and claim that he had gotten all of them for his birthday but he didn't want them, so could he trade them in for store credit? At the time, Toys R Us had a pretty loose policy towards returns. If you brought something in still sealed in its original box, and it was an item they sold, you could get store credit for it. This worked for a while, but eventually this guy was banned from every Toys R Us within like an hour's drive. Eventually, the comics and action figures craze died down, and this guy went out of business shortly after. This almost sounds like the same place they used to call vintage villains, but had to move and change their name to The Vault. My brother tried to sell his magic cards there, and the guy looked through them on the counter. Some slid to the floor, and the employee said, "Sorry, these are worthless basic-ass cards. I could probably only get a few bucks for all of this." Needless to say, we sold them online, and he ended up getting a few hundred for one deck. Story 14. Susan G. Komen. The pink ribbon is a scam. They wanted nothing to do with my mom after she was diagnosed. A rep basically said, "We are famous for promoting awareness. You are now aware that you have cancer. Our job is done." H&R Block used to do something like this with their tax preparation service. Not sure if they still do. Their slogan was something like, "Come on in and we'll tell you if there are mistakes in your self-prepared return for free." So you go in, they spend 5 minutes looking at your self-prepared return, and they tell you, "Yes, indeed, there are mistakes here." And then you ask them to tell you what the mistakes are, and that's when they tell you it'll cost $75 for them to tell you. The first year I qualified for a foreign earned income exclusion, I went to H&R Block. I explained that I qualified for that exclusion, and they looked at me like I had 3 heads and said, "Oh, you'll need a tax expert for that." That's why I came here. I thought you were the tax experts. I ended up filing it myself with basic software for the next several years. Wasn't complicated at all. Again, with the tax companies. Story 15. Any kind of small, locally owned clothing boutique, 9 times out of 10, it's nothing but fast fashion rebranded to be a small business owner. Most people don't realize this and will happily boast, "I don't shop at Shein, I only buy from local boutiques, etc." The worst, in my opinion, are the ones who claim to have some type of Christian or religious influence in their store, yet their clothing is literally made in sweatshops. I started my own little brand and asked a local boutique that advertised shop local to carry my brand. Their response was so negative it caught me off guard. They admitted they only buy from online distributors. You just reminded me of the time I contacted a brand new bakery that opened within 5 minutes of a walk of where I ran my tiny little coffee roastery. They made a big deal upon launching about how everything was made with local ingredients. So I got in touch to see if they'd be interested in my coffee roasted so locally that I could walk it to them to deliver. They replied to say that they were happy with the generic big name coffee they had and doubted we could compete on price. Seems that by locally sourced, they meant they got it from the local big cash and carry. That's kind of hilarious. Story 16. Johnson & Johnson knew for decades, possibly since their inception, that their talcum powder contained asbestos. Once it became a problem, they continued to sell it in low-income neighborhoods because the poor couldn't afford doctors or lawyers. My mother received a metal-on-metal hip replacement. Her surgeon thought he was doing the best thing for her because it would last longer and she would be elderly when they had to go in and finally replace it. Johnson & Johnson owns who made her implant. A couple of years later, the news broke out that the metal-on-metal hips were shedding ions and were slowly poisoning people. The company knew. They knew, and they didn't tell the surgeons or the patients so that they could sell more units and then tie it up in court. The revision was horrible. Though she came through it okay, she had some complications. Unshockingly, if your tissues are bathed in chromium and cobalt, you are going to heal more slowly. She's doing fine still today. She used a chunk of her settlement to get one of those jogging pools and goes and water walks it miles a day. I still wonder how much better shape she would be in without the metal in her system. My nanny, love you and miss you dearly, was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Can't quite remember because of my PTSD that has blurred out a large portion of my life from ages 9 to 18. Anyway, she said something to me as a child that has stuck with me my entire life, 33 now. And it was along the lines of, "My doctor thinks my ovarian cancer was caused by my always using talcum powder down there my entire life. Because, and maybe this was just a British thing, not entirely sure, but growing up after a bath when we were dry, we put talcum powder on our bits and bobs. If I remember correctly, she asked me to promise her to never ever do that again because of what her doctor said, and I haven't. Well, she survived ovarian cancer. However, the treatment from that gave her leukemia, which is what she sadly died from a few few years later. So yeah, screw you, Johnson & Johnson, for taking an amazing, loving, caring, and compassionate woman, who to this day I think about almost daily and see her in every aspect of my life in myself. F cancer and F Johnson & Johnson. That's honestly one of the most evil things I've heard a company do. Story 17. Anything self-service or delivery. If you don't get it yourself, it's likely being contaminated. I currently work in a restaurant, but previously worked for a grocery store. Here are a few things I have encountered. Customers taking bites out of donuts in the self-service donut case and putting them back. A grocery store pickup clerk grabbed a bare loaf of bread pre-COVID with utility gloves that are also used on trash and wood pallets. Customers have been witnessed on multiple occasions licking the serving spoons in the self-service soup bar and then putting them back. This led to its removal. People sticking their bare hands in the lettuce pans at the self-service salad bar. Someone posted on Reddit a week ago confessing that they picked up a DoorDash order for a customer which was a coffee with whipped cream on top. They had their dog in the car which decided to lick the whipped cream off the top of the drink. OP lied to the customer saying that the whipped cream melted. I agree with staying away from self-serve food. I've seen small children on more than one occasion touch multiple items while walking past the baked goods at Wegmans. I've seen them try to get sprinkles or glaze off of donuts. The employees don't do anything when you tell them either. It's so freaking gross. Damn, in my store, if someone does that and we see it, we throw whatever it is contaminated out. We can't monitor it all the time, so a lot of this sort of stuff likely goes undetected. I've thrown out a whole section of the salad bar before. I gave the person who did it a good scolding too because they did it while I was nearby. After COVID, a lot of the self-service stuff was pre-packaged if possible. The bread is now packaged in bags and olives from the olive bar are pre-packaged in a cooler, and the olive bar was removed. I haven't visited any of those stations since last year, so it's likely things have changed since then. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and don't forget to subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.